What separates the winners from the losers is how a person reacts to each new twist of fate. Donald Trump, Art of the Deal. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Goodness. Today is it's a rough day. I feel like I'm just way off my game. I've got things all jumbled and out of order. And I'm behind this week. Not just today, but this week. So let me point out really quickly for my folks that are listening via podcast, like Spotify or iTunes or, whatever your favorite host is. If you're listening to this episode, you're now up to date. I got a little behind on that. Yesterday was interesting on social media. I ended up getting into some like heavy, long, drawn out debates with people that were kind of pointless, but it happened, and like that adds to, just kind of being off my game, a little bit disheveled this week. But the show must go on, so we're gonna make this happen. Um, might be a little bit fumbling around today because I didn't quite like I have all of my content, but normally what I do is I plug it in. So like I got it all prepared and everything, but then I normally go through and I plug it into the system here so that I can more seamlessly show it to you. So that's going to be a little bit kind of rocky today, but we'll do our best. No worries. Let me give you a report already. So yesterday, I told you about, hey, I joined the Republican Liberty Caucus. And I just kind of explained myself and my rationale and, what I intended to do. And it just kind of feels like already I'm getting some light pushback, even from some RLC members. Uh, Polite, like nobody's being rude or anything. Um, but I've had a couple people question. They're like, all right, well, if you're not joining the Republican Party, how are you going to be a benefit? Okay, well, I talked to one of their national officers, and it seemed like from my conversation that there would be an opportunity to coalition and assist with them, right? Without actually joining. And I was told that they have members that are, that are not, at least maybe there's a miscommunication, but what I got out of it was there already are members of the RLC who are registered libertarian that assist. But some people seem to be suggesting that, like, hey, you're just not going to be effective unless you join. Now, maybe that's just their way of kind of like, let's try to get them in part of our numbers, or maybe they mean it, or maybe a little bit of both. The big benefit there would be that I could attend their convention and then I could vote, which I understand that, I would not be able to do. So anyway, who knows? Who knows where it'll go? I just say take what you can get. Okay. Um, Perhaps, if you need me to maybe email some relevant representatives on an issue, I'd be willing to do that. I'd be willing to promote ideas that I'm aligned with. Maybe, have some people on the show from time to time that are relevant and, would work toward that coalition and my goals and their goals. Perhaps maybe go to Tallahassee, for or attend other events, including local ones. So we'll see. We'll see if this actually even works out. Maybe it won't. Maybe, perhaps it will all be insufficient. And if that's the case, if they're like, look, you're not really going to be useful to us if you don't join the party, so be it. I'll go on about my way and I'll continue, being a libertarian, registered libertarian, doing my show, um, adding my value where I can. So we'll see. I just I know that has nothing to do with the 47 weekly, but I figured since this was kind of big news and it was just fresh from yesterday, I figured, you know what, I'll let you guys know that it already seems to be like, I don't know, is it gonna work? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. All right, let's get into this. So this is interesting. So I like to do this 47 weekly, which I didn't do yesterday in light of other pressing information. So now we're going to do it today, but normally it would be on Wednesday. And I'll try not to bump it too very often, only bump it if we have to, like there's a really, really big story or something very interesting. That will be my goal. So we'll see if I can keep to that. But so in doing this um, 47 weekly, I came across a new source that you might find interesting. So let me put it up on the screen here. This is called POTUS Tracker. Okay, you can go to potustracker.us, and it's actually a pretty neat site. I probably should zoom in a little bit. Let me see if we can. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's better. All right, so we've zoomed in a bit here. Um, what it does is it tracks the president's official schedule, if you care about that, executive action and legislation, should care about that. And then it has Truth Social post on it. So the way I found it, I don't remember, I don't know what I was searching, but I was doing some searching and I came across a link and it was like, I created a website that you can see Trump's Truth Social post without actually going to Truth Social. Like they were kind of excited. And I was like, oh, well, let me check out this, what does this look like? And I'm glad I clicked on it. So here we have like this map, right? And there's like, here's where the president currently is. Then you can see at the bottom, it's got executive actions and social media. So if we scroll down here, we could see official presidential schedule, June 11th. That was yesterday. At 7:35 p.m., him and the first lady arrived at the White House. 3:30 p.m., they attended the, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, Les Miserables. I don't speak French. Opening night. Prior to that, they were en route to the Kennedy Center, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's kind of interesting if you care about that level of detail of the president. My opinion, I don't like. I guess it would be neat if something serious happened, like there was a big, huge event, and people are like, "Where's the president?" And you could kind of get an idea. But again, that just seems kind of creepy to me to follow the president that closely. It's kind of like that dude that on Twitter a while back. He had the Elon tracker, and he was tracking Elon's private plane. That was a bit creepy. I mean, and they're only doing it from public information, so it's not like they were doing any kind of weird hacking or anything. But still, it just feels a little creepy to me. All right, so I'm probably not going to be using his presidential schedule very often. But then you've got this executive action. So this is kind of cool. Oh, let me go back up here. So up here at the top, you've got. Let me zoom out a wee bit here. There you go. So you've got all legislation, executive orders, grants of clemency, memoranda, proclamations, and suspended. So these different categories that you can select, and I think that's kind of neat. Right now, I'm not going to click on any of them, but if you wanted to go and kind of narrow it down and kind of search through, it links to them all. So like here, we've got this first one. See if we can't. There we go. So we have this first one here, executive order in green here. Department of Defense Security for the protection of Department of Homeland Security functions. So then it gives you like a little summary of what it is. You can click read more, get a little pop up here, and then read source, and then it'll link to the source. And then it looks like, let's see, what is this? A screenshot? You can take a screenshot. That's pretty neat. Here's the link. And then that download button. Let's see. Share. Oh, share button. Yeah. So pretty neat. It's a pretty neat site. We'll get back into this in a second. Then it's got social media. So you go down here and you can click on it, and it will have Donald, his Truth Social post. So in order of recent, so you can scroll down and just look through. And I think this is pretty neat. It does obscure the media. So if there's like a video or something, then that gets obscured. But otherwise, that I think is it's pretty neat to have this all in one spot, and then you can just come and check in on the president. So I will be adding this to my resources to help follow along. Because now instead of going to Truth Social and then maybe going to the White House website and checking out his executive orders or trying to figure out, like, it just lists them right here, right, nice and easy for me to use. So I think that's pretty cool. So go ahead and check that out, POTUStracker.us. And then they have some sort of pro version. I didn't really get into that. It even has dark mode, so we can read it proper. How often is it updated? Constantly it says, where's the data come from? White House Communications, Congress.gov, so on and so forth. Um, Let's see. You can get notifications, summaries, blah blah blah. That's pretty neat. It's kind of cool. I like it. I'm trying to figure out what you can subscribe, and it looks like you'll get like text message updates if you're really that interested. I don't know that I'm that excited about the president, any president for that matter, that I would want text message updates. But if that's you, that's cool. So POTUStracker.us, and you can check it out. So let's get into the first item of the day here. And so today I'm going to talk about just to kind of touch upon the LA riots. We're not going to go into depth on it. We're just going to kind of say like, all right, well, what's the president been saying? What are my thoughts on it? Then we'll get into the Trump accounts, and we'll talk about some airspace executive orders, and then a memoranda. So it's actually I went to this POTUS tracker website, and that's where I was like, oh, look, there's some airspace orders, regarding executive orders regarding drones. There's some memoranda that I thought was interesting. So we're just going to kind of cruise around and see what the president has been up to, because that's what the 47 Weekly is about. And then I'll give you my perspective. And if I agree with something, because I'm objective, I will tell you, like, yeah, this is a good thing. I like this, or maybe I like something with the caveat, whatever. Or if I disagree with something, I'll say, I disagree. I think this is wrong. This is why. So that's what this whole 47 Weekly is about. I still want to find a different name, because I swear it just feels like I'm kind of like jumping onto this bandwagon or copying Mark K, who's a good dude, and he's been on the show before, but he's got the 47 Daily, and I just feel like I'm copying him. So if you guys come up with any cool names, for a weekly just kind of update on the president. That doesn't sound like corny. I don't know. Like that's the old people language, corny. So if you're like younger and you're like, I don't know what that means, that might be the equivalent of like cringe. But if you have any ideas for a better name, I'm all ears. But until such time, we're just gonna go with 47 weekly. And if hey, maybe Mark can just pat himself on the back and be like, haha, I'm influencing the guy already. He joined the RLC because Mark K is a Republican. And he could be like, aha, we're getting to DL. So but that's fine. Anyway, let's look at this first post that he had. So let's see here. So here is an interesting post from True Social. He says, if there's an insurrection, I would certainly invoke it. If we didn't get involved right now, Los Angeles would be burning down just like it was burning down a number of months ago. We are not playing around. He's serious, folks. He ain't playing around. What I find interesting about this, he goes, if there's an insurrection, if. So it's like not guaranteed to be an insurrection, right? Like a lot of people are like, oh, there's an insurrection. We need to invoke this power and this power, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the president right now saying that it's not. Right? At least at the time that he posted this. If there's an insurrection. Okay, cool. And then it comes with a video, and I thought the video was kind of interesting, so we'll play that video here real quick. So let's see what he said here in the video. Hope
if there's an insurrection, I would certainly invoke it. We'll see, but
hold on. How did the video get so tiny? How are you going to see that? There we go. Let's try this.
An insurrection, I would certainly invoke it. We'll see, but I can tell you, last night was terrible. The night before that was terrible. We have, as you've seen, it was on most of your networks, people with big, heavy hammers pounding the concrete and pounding curbs, pounding it, breaking up all, and handing these big chunks of concrete to people. And they were taking that concrete, going up on bridges and dropping it into the roof of a car. They were throwing it at our police. They were throwing it at our soldiers that are there. And we got it stopped, and we have them in custody right now. Look.
Okay, so let's stop here. Okay, so I support protesting. Like I'm not particularly invested in the idea of protesting, so you're not going to see me at protest like very often. If I'm there, I'm checking it out. It's very unlikely that I go to a protest to actually protest. I have done it a couple of times, mostly begrudging, just because I don't personally see the value in protesting. But you have that right to protest. You can be loud, you can be noisy, and to some degree, you can be inconvenient to your fellow man. But it depends on how, right? Like it depends. If you say, "Hey, we want to march and have a march a parade, not a parade, but a march, down some city blocks," and then you go through the right process to make it happen, right? Or like, I hate saying this, if you get like your permits and whatnot, and I only say that in the context of if it's a roadway and you need to utilize it for a purpose that is not driving, I do think that locally that should be managed, that should be organized, right? We should block it off. That way we don't have an unnecessary clash of people that are trying to exercise their right to protest and people that are like, well, I'd like to get from point A to point B, and this is the route that I need to take. We need to organize it in such a way so that everybody is able to do what they need to do, and it's properly organized. So in that context, I think a permit, number one, I don't think you should have to pay for a permit. The permit would only be for the purposes of helping to organize and direct the flow of traffic. That's it. No other purpose, right? And that way, like for me in my mind, if I'm hosting a march and I want to go down a particular boulevard or something from one point to the next, I might submit I might submit for a permit. That permit is only for the government to be able to say, the local government to be able to say, okay, DL and his organization wants to march down. Here are the rules that we've kind of set aside very, very limited rules, which I know is not the case, but very limited rules. Like, hey, what time you have to give us a time that you're going to start. You have to give us a time that you're going to end. How many people are you going to be there? Right. What's the purpose of it? Blah, blah, blah. Basically, it's not really getting permission from my perspective. I don't like to, I don't think that a permit should be about permission so much as just organization. That's it. So getting back on track here. Um, if you are protesting, I support that. I support your right to get out, be noisy, perhaps be inconvenient, like I was just describing. Maybe you march down a particular road or something like that. But the moment that you start destroying property, the moment that you start engaging in violence, well, now, as far as I'm concerned, you are committing crimes and you should be arrested for it. I do believe that should be the local law enforcement's role, right? At best, maybe state if it's necessary. So I just want to point that out. But I don't consider that to be an insurrection, right? Insurrection is a very specific term, and we should be very careful about how we use that. So anyway, let's continue listening.
If we didn't get involved, right now, Los Angeles would be burning, just like it was burning a number of months ago with all the houses that were lost. Los Angeles right now would be on fire, and we have it in great shape. We're not playing around.
Okay, so I thought this was interesting, and we're going to explore this a little bit more here, because he's like, "Hey, if it weren't for us, like we got out there, and these people were like taking concrete and were breaking it up and using that to assault people and dropping it on cars." His comment here is the first that I saw of people going to overpasses and dropping bricks on cars. I'm not sure that actually happened. Maybe it did. I didn't investigate on that particular note, but I want to explore this idea of if we didn't get involved. Okay.
How do you determine whether or not there is an insurrection?
Well, you'll take a look at what's happening. I mean, I could tell you there were certain areas of Los Angeles that you could have called it an insurrection. It was terrible. But these are paid insurrectionists. These are paid troublemakers. They get money. And when you take.
So I think that's an interesting comment, because he's like, these are paid protesters. Well, that's weird, because I've been seeing arguments, and I have engaged in arguments with people that are saying like these are the migrants doing this, right? And maybe there are some immigrants there, but which is it? Is this paid protesters? Are they immigrants that are just angry and want to wave the Mexican flag? Which it seems unlikely that it would be both, but it could be, right? Like it could be both. It could be that there were paid actors here, not actors in the sense of like pretending, but just people, participants, paid participants. But then the question is, who are those participants? Who is getting paid? We're going to explore that a little bit more here in just a second. Let's continue listening.
Take a look at what they do. Where they show up and everyone's saying, what's he doing? He's pounding the curbs. This one guy's pounding the curb, breaking the curb, and handing big pieces of granite. In some cases, it's granite and concrete to other people.
Okay, so I think it's funny that he's like granite and concrete. We could get into the differences between those two, but if you throw a piece of granite at somebody or you throw a piece of concrete at somebody, I don't think there's going to be much of a difference when it hits them. Or if you drop it on their car, yeah, you might be able to technically measure the difference, because I presume that granite's a little bit harder, but I don't think the overall in general difference is much to talk about. I just thought that was funny.
And they're running out with it. And then we watch the other people and they try and throw it into the face of the soldiers, throw it into the face of the police, and they hurt some people very badly. They go up on bridges, they drop it down on the cars as the cars are moving. They're not breaking the curb because they're doing a demolition service. They're breaking it to hand out to people as a weapon. It's bad stuff. I've never seen that before.
So if that's true, then yes, that's destruction of property. and that would be violence towards somebody if they're dropping it on cars or if they're throwing it at people. Even if they're, like I told you guys in my civil unrest video, I am not an anarchist of any type. So therefore, the anarchists out there who are looking at this and saying, "Yeah, we got to fight back against the government, and you get what you get," kind of like that attitude. That's not me. But let's talk about let's talk about this if we didn't get involved. So let's take a look over here at he actually has a memorandum from, what date is this? June 7th. Okay. So we'll put this up on the screen for you to see here. Boom. There we go. All right. So this is the Department of Defense Security for the protection of Department Homeland Security functions. Okay. Memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. Subject, let's read this here. Numerous incidents of violence and disorder have recently occurred and threaten to continue in response to the enforcement of federal law by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and other United States government personnel who are performing federal functions and supporting the faithful execution of federal immigration laws. Now, I know some people argue and say, hey, federal government has no oversight of immigration laws. We're not having that argument right now. I want to talk about whether or not this comment about if we didn't get involved really makes sense. So let's skip down here to my highlight, and it says, to the extent that protest or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of the laws, they constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. In light of these incidents and credible threats of continued violence, right, by the authority vested in me as President of the United States, as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, I hereby call into federal service members and units of the National Guard. Okay, so I want to focus on this. To the extent that protest or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of the laws. So if there's anything that's going on that's unrelated to ICE trying to do their job, right? He sent ICE in. He said, "Go arrest some people. Maybe they're bad people. Whatever. That information will come out. We can have a discussion on who they arrested, and what information they had at the time to arrest that person. We can have that conversation later." So I think a lot of people are misinformed. I think a lot of people look at this and go, "Oh, there's riots. Send in the National Guard." The way it works, as I talked about on my show the other day, if you have riots, then the National Guard can be called up by the governor to go and deal with those, or they can just send in tons of police, which I think I saw that, by the way. Um, but in order for the president to get involved, there are rules surrounding that. And one of the things that I think that people are misinformed about is that if people are just protesting and they're damaging property, but they're otherwise not getting in the way of ICE, that is not necessarily grounds. I mean, it might be, but that's not necessarily grounds for the president to invoke power to come in and deal with the situation. And as we see right here in his own memoranda, it says, to the extent that protest or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of the law. So in other words, if they're getting in the way, then that will be a form of rebellion against the United States, the authority of the government of the United States. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if it's a handful of people, right, the numbers count. If there's 5 people that are throwing rocks, I'm just giving a number. I'm not saying that's how many there are. If there's 5 people that are throwing rocks at ICE agents, that I would say is not an insurrection. There's just too few to really say this is a threat to government, right? Like there's just 5 people. If there were 500 people throwing rocks and otherwise attacking agents, that's a different story, right? That's a big deal. 5 versus 500. Do you see the point? Good. So I'm just showing you right here. He's already kind of laying it out. Like, okay, this depends on what is actually happening on the ground. Now, I want to show you, and I think that's all I have. I don't have anything. Oh, no, I did. So, in addition, the Secretary of Defense may employ any other members of the regular armed forces as necessary to augment and support the protection of federal functions and property in any number determined appropriate in his discretion. To carry out this mission, the deployed military personnel may perform those military protective services that the Secretary of Defense determines are reasonably necessary. This is the key point here, to ensure the protection and safety of federal personnel and property. Okay, so if you have protesters that are damaging, say, city property or state property, that's not within the scope here, right? So, and I was arguing with somebody yesterday, and they were like, "Oh, you're just," because I was trying to. Yesterday. Let me go on a slight tangent here, and I'll come right back to this. Yesterday, somebody had pointed out, they had pointed to Little Rock back when President Eisenhower invoked and he basically took charge of the National Guard against the will of the governor in Arkansas, and at the time, and this was to impose to enforce the rule of law, which was desegregation. And some people were like, "Yeah, this is basically similar," and I was like, "It's not similar." Like that one, number one, was I believe that's the one where was that the one? Now I'm drawing a blank on which one, because I talked about several incidents, but I think okay. So I might be wrong on this, and I'm not going to stop the show to try to go and just double check, but I believe that was the particular case where the um, the governor was not enforcing the rule of law. And so, therefore, Eisenhower took control of the National Guard against the governor's will. Pretty sure I got this right. Against the governor's will. And it was because there were civil rights violations that came with the constitutional backing from the Brown versus Board of Education. Okay. Those details matter because what's happening in LA, as we'll talk about more here in just a moment, it's not number one, it's not backed by a explicit Supreme Court ruling. Like there's not this issue of, okay, the Supreme Court has ruled this government is now in direct conflict with this ruling. That's not what happened. And remember, that's what it says up here. Okay. Violence directly inhibit the execution of the laws, right? So, and what are the laws at this particular time? This is ICE agents going in and trying to make arrest, right? That's the laws that we're talking about. We're not talking about just any laws. We're talking about very specific laws. What are ICE agents even doing there? They are there to arrest illegal immigrants who, have done whatever crimes. So what I'm getting at with all of this and why I'm kind of sidetracking a little bit is to point out that the details matter. Then somebody said, okay, well, what about the LA riots of 1992? Well, the LA riots of 1992, that was yet different than the crisis in Little Rock, because in 1992, the then governor, and I'm trying to remember his name, Wilson, I think it was Governor Wilson. Governor Wilson at the time, he deployed the National Guard, the governor of California, to deal with the riots. They were still overwhelmed. So then he reached out to H.W. Bush and he said, will you use your federal power to send in more troops to assist us? And he did, right? These details matter because we need to know what is happening in order so we can identify what should the government do? What should the local government do? What should the state government do? What should our federal government do? These details matter. So when Trump says, "Hey, if it weren't for us, it would be even worse." Well, that's a convenient argument to make. And a lot of people do that with any government action. They'll say, "Well, if we didn't do this, if we didn't like during COVID, right? If we didn't shut down everything, it would have been way worse." Maybe, maybe not. right? We need to start demanding some sort of evidence to support these things. Or if we can look and say, are you playing loose with the truth? I think in this particular case, the president is playing a little loose with the truth. So let's take a look at this other video. Remember, speaking of the 1992 riots, remember Rooftop Korean? And I don't have the picture, but that's the guy who he's wearing like a red shirt. He's a middle-aged Korean man. He's got a rifle in his hand. He's kind of smiling. He's walking along a rooftop. And what happened in 1992 is the riots were so spread out. They were everywhere, right? And businesses were being destroyed. And so like there's a picture, an iconic picture of rooftop Korean, other Koreans on a rooftop with their rifles. Basically, I don't know if they actually shot anybody and killed them, but they were prepared to defend their property with force, with lethal force. So, and I support that, right? Like somebody comes to destroy your property, as we've talked about on the show before, or as I've talked about it, you have the right to defend yourself and your property because your property is an extension of yourself. You work very hard at your job to get money. You then use that money to buy things, right? So therefore, the things that you buy with that money are an extension of your labor, which came from your person. So therefore, you can defend it with lethal force if necessary. So I want to show you a video here. This comes from Glenn Beck's program. And I thought this was interesting because he had Rooftop Korean on talking about the difference between 1992 and the riots today. So let's take a listen. Where's that video? Do I have that? I don't have it queued up. Give me a second. This is what I was telling you about earlier, where I don't have quite. Oh, let's get back to where I want to be here. So it'll take just a second. Where did it go? Oh, did it? Yes, here it is. Okay. Perfect. All right. So here we go. We'll play this video.
Compare what you went through, the Rodney King riots, the George Floyd riots, and this riot. Is there any difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The 1992 riots were organic. You had different parts of LA County that were upset, and you had fires and looting because the Black community was spread out through South LA, Compton, South Central, Ladera Heights, different areas. And you can actually see that, when you look at the city as a whole from, let's say, Hollywood, you saw the fires from different parts of the city.
Okay. So he's already kind of like saying, look, this was different in 92 because the riots were very spread out. So it was actually hard to avoid them because they were everywhere. He said the Black population, which at the time were kind of leading the charge, if you will, on the in the riots. They were the community itself was spread out, so it wasn't like just this one community of Black people over in this particular area. It was like some of these from this particular area, some Black folk from this area, some Black folk from this area, so on and so forth. And then so that's where you get this rioting. And you might, if you're a little on the younger side, the 1992 riots were sparked by the arrest of Rodney King and the way that it went down, where there was videotape of police officers just beating the hell out of them, and then they were acquitted, and then there's all hell broke loose. So that's the little history.
These riots that are occurring now, which is like the 2020, what I call the Antifa BLM riots, and now the 2025 LA riots that are happening down, they're very centralized, and they're not organic. They're being funded by NGOs.
Okay, so he's already said like the BLM riots, these riots were localized. They were in specific spots. I mean, he's making a claim that they were funded by NGOs. And this kind of goes back to the USAID. And there is evidence to support that there are riots being funded by some entity somewhere. Normally you hear George Soros is the name. Whether that's true or not, or to what extent, is for a conversation some other day. But here, I agree. The little research that I did says, yep, there is evidence to suggest that riots are being paid for by somebody specific. Okay, that's a good point. We want to know.
And it's a leftist Marxist agenda that's being pushed to make it appear as if there's a widespread support for this. For example.
Okay, so I just think about what he just said. He goes, It's a Marxist agenda because they want it to appear like it's like there's more support than there really is. Now, what is that support? This is fighting against ICE agents, right? Actually going to war with them in a sense. And he's like, look, it's, this is trying to show that there's more support, but maybe there's not.
The current riots that are occurring right now, it's just happening in downtown LA. And the curfew
Right.
that was imposed by Mayor Bass is only for, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think it's a 2 square mile radius.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Or a 1 square mile. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have a curfew that includes 1 single square mile of LA. That's the cordon area where they said, all right, look, you have to go home. You have to go home and go to bed by a certain time. Otherwise, you can be arrested or whatever the details are in that. So I think this is interesting news. Let's continue.
I mean, that's where it is. I mean, anywhere outside of that 1 square mile, life is proceeding as it always has been, and it doesn't look like anything is going on. Whereas the difference in 1992, whether you were in Hollywood, Culver City, which is further out west, and then Hollywood is up north past downtown LA, and obviously south of downtown LA, you had fires, looting. I mean, it was widespread. This isn't anything like what's going on back in 1992, and it just kind of shows the incompetence of the current leadership of not being able to get their arms around something like this, and they are, because of their lack of leadership and I would say common sense, they're letting these protesters spiral out of control because many of them, the playbook is for them to start in downtown LA at City Hall and then make their way down to the 101 freeway, which really pisses off a lot of people because that's, it's a highly traveled freeway in LA.
It's a parking lot. And you stop me from getting home. I don't care. I don't care if you're free for free candy bars, reindeer, and Santa. I hate your guts if you delay me from on that highway. I hate you when I'm driving home.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's no widespread support for this.
Okay. So that was interesting that, now it is Rooftop Korean who is, somebody that lives there. That's his perspective. Maybe there's another perspective to have, but I thought it was interesting that he points out, like, there are certain factual elements of what he said. You can go and look and say, like, it's 1 square mile, right? And you can look and you can say, was BLM, was that more contained? How did they compare to 1992 riots? Okay. So I want to show you another picture because I thought this was kind of interesting because now we have, and just to keep this in line of what we're talking about. President Trump said, had we not went out there, it'd be a disaster everywhere. Okay, so that's the claim, which kind of buttresses whether or not he should have invoked any kind of presidential powers to send in troops. Right, that's part of the big argument. And in order to identify whether or not that was appropriate, which sometimes it is, right? You can make an argument and say, hey, look, the governor, the mayor, whomever, you are not protecting people. Therefore, we're going to step in and do your job for you. In fact, and I talked about it again on the civil unrest episode, where after the Civil War, the Insurrection Act was amended explicitly because you had the KKK going around terrorizing and harming Black people. So they were like, all right, look, if the states or the cities aren't going to protect people, we have to, from direct, clear, unambiguous violence. Okay, fine. I think that's appropriate. That would be a case where I think, it's an extenuating circumstance, but it is one where the federal government might have to step in and say, all right, you are letting people come to harm. We're going to step in. Otherwise, normally I would say, hey, leave things to the states. Okay. So you've got President Trump. He's like, hey, if there's an insurrection, we'll deal with it. They're lucky that, we came in, we had to come in and save them. But then you have Rooftop Korean who's like, it's, this is not really organic. And when you look at this one, the BLM, when you look at these, they are vastly different than the riots in 1992. And then you have people online that are like, oh man, look at all these immigrants. They're terrible people. They're bringing their third world attitudes over here and they're destroying our country. That just further gets our resolve that we got to get rid of them. Okay. So let me show you this image here. And this is from somebody who I'm no longer friends with. I'm not even sure if we ever were friends, but that's beside the point. Clinton Russell from Lockdown, I believe, is his podcast. So he posted, he says, in the past 48 hours, there have been riots reported in the following cities: New York, uh, Los Angeles, Santa Ana, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, Portland. He said, this is not organic. It's being orchestrated. No doubt about it. Interesting. What am I trying to say here? What is the point? Well, number one, people say this in recent riots. People have been saying this. George Floyd, BLM, so on and so forth. Remember in 2017 when conservative speakers were trying to go to universities and give speeches, and you had like Antifa and other leftists, they were damaging property. I think Berkeley was a really significant one. You can go back and you can watch the video footage and you can see the pictures from where they basically were setting fire to things and throwing stuff through windows and whatnot, and they were really damaging property. But a lot of this was just this really localized unrest over conservative speakers. So there is an argument to be made that some of these riots are not organic and that somebody's prodding somebody. So if we go back and we look and we say, okay, well, we had George Floyd, we had BLM, we had universities, and we know that there was Americans involved in those. And now scroll forward to 2025, we've got some unrest that's very localized with a similar pattern to the George Floyd, the BLM, the universities. And a lot of people are blaming the immigrants. But then you start seeing people coming out and they're saying, well, this is not organic. This is orchestrated, just like these other ones. Okay. Then a couple of things here. Number one, are migrants really the problem? Is that really the problem? Or do we have an American problem? Because a lot of people want to talk about like socialism and, Marxist and commies, and they're out doing all these bad things, Antifa, whatever. Okay, fine. Perhaps, perhaps what we're seeing going on in LA has very little to do with the actual sentiment of immigrants. And maybe there are some immigrants there. I'm not, there's a high population of immigrants in California already. So if you have violence, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary. It wouldn't be unreasonable to say, okay, well, maybe, maybe there are some immigrants out there. But is this really the sentiment of immigrants? And then more to the point, if these are all orchestrated, what is the president doing to deal with whoever is orchestrating this? Why are we not hearing about that, Mr. President? Why don't we not see executive orders that say, I'm going to dig in and find out who is doing this? Now, a lot of people like to claim, and they might say, well, it's George Soros and they're just trying to, usurp America and blah, blah, blah. And maybe that's the case. Then again, why don't you think about something? And I told you, this is a little on the conspiratorial side. Perhaps either one, like, because you have to ask, what is the motive, right? So perhaps they're not necessarily by George Soros, because if the Republican response to all of these is to increase legislation, then is that what leftists really want? Are they really trying to get more legislation from Republicans that really aligns with Republican values, that gets Republicans and conservatives throughout the nation, gets their support? Is that really their goal? Or is it perhaps that um, these orchestrations, if they are happening, are coming from the right that are basically utilizing people on the left in order to further legislation that people on the right would support? Just a thought. It's a thought. Now that has the only thing that has to do with the president really is, why aren't you figuring out who these people are? Who is paying these people, right? Who is orchestrating this? If we got all these people saying they're not organic, okay, who's doing it? And then we also have to say, okay, well, if they're if somebody is paying them, then do you really need to invoke this presidential power to go in and deal with it, especially if it's localized to literally a single square mile? Like, that doesn't sound like it's a huge problem. I mean, I think LA is like 500 square miles, right? So you've got 1/500th of LA that's having a problem out of however, whatever the ratio of size of LA is to California. And then you have the president invoking presidential powers against the will of their current governor and their mayor. This just doesn't seem to me to be the correct usage of this. But that's not the conversation people are having. It seems like people are having all these different conversations and nobody's kind of bringing this in and saying, all right, let's be careful about the conspiracies, but let's also start asking some relevant questions. If the president's going to acknowledge that that these are being paid for, if Glenn Beck is having people on that have lived these experiences and lives in the area and can kind of tell you like, hey, there is a massive difference between 1992 and some of the more recent protests. And then if the president's saying like, look, if it weren't for us, it would be more like 1992, but then that's questionable because, again, these seem to be, as we're told, localized to a single square area. So if they're localized, and then the question is that really true? Right? So there's a lot of questions here. And this is why we have to be careful with the conspiracy theories, because you just don't know. You really don't know. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I figured I would just kind of present that to you, and I want to try to be careful. I don't like to get involved in conspiracies and pull up all this information and then connect the dots. That's not really what I like to do, but you can connect the dots to start developing a list of questions that are very relevant that do need to be answered. That, and you can start saying like, look, who is paying for this? If that's the case, right? And why aren't you talking about it? Why don't you have a presidential memorandum? Why don't you have an executive order that's going to find out? Why are we not hearing about that? Why is nobody talking about this? Like, we want to talk about it and say, okay, well, they're orchestrated. Great. Who? So I thought that was interesting. Let's see here. So we're going to move on to another item here. Let's see. I'm trying to bring this up here. So let's talk about these Trump accounts. Yeah. Let's see. Where's that? Back too far. Trump accounts. All right. So let's see here. Here's what President Trump said. Why is this one not working? Okay, hold on. Let's try this. Give me a second here. All right. There we go. All right. So here's what he said. That one's not messed up. There we go. He said $1,000 child Trump accounts are a pro-family initiative that will help millions of Americans harness the strength of our economy to lift up the next generation. They are fully funded through targeted reforms in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Here's my thing. Number one, this just sounds like Social Security, just same version of it, right? We're going to take money from people and we're going to invest it for you for whatever purpose. And then, of course, when they do that, they have to create all the rules around it in terms of, when are you allowed to have it? How much do you have to give? So on and so forth. My big problem with this, number one, it's socialism. It's redistribution of wealth. And people on the right, seems to be some mixed buddies, but it's mixed in terms of what I'm seeing from people. Some people are supporting it, some people are not. But more importantly than whether it's mixed or not, in terms of support, is that there's not enough opposition for the president to say, okay, my base, the people that support me don't want this. There's not enough opposition. So even if you could say it's like 50-50 split, some people like it, some people don't, there's not enough opposition to stop this idea. And for me, I look and I say, I don't like this. Why? Why do I not like this? Because it's really pro-family if you don't take Americans' money in the first place. Let's walk through this really quickly. Let's say that you're going to give my son $1,000. Now, if you take $1,000 from me, and you put it in an account for him, number one, I could have given him that $1,000 if I had it. Okay. So there's that. But number two, when you take it and when you put it somewhere and when you manage it and you create rules around all of this, somebody has to do that work. So now that somebody has to be paid. So now it's going to cost more than $1,000, right? How much more? I don't have a number for that, but there's more because somebody has to create the databases. They have to create the technology, not create the technology, but utilize technology to create websites or whatever, so that people can log in or maybe have access to it when they need it, when it comes due, whatever. You've got to have somebody sit down and write all the rules and regulations, so on and so forth. And so, in other words, that $1,000 is going to cost more than that in order to implement it. And so, therefore, you're going to have to take more money from me, more than 1,000, whatever that money ends up being. And so, if you would just let me keep my $1,000 or the 1,000 plus, then I could have done something better, right? Now you might argue and say, well, DL, some people aren't going to use their money the right way. I get that. But again, we're talking about being a pro-family initiative, right? And so if you want to strengthen our economy, then let people have their money. Don't take it from them in the first place. And then they will use it as they see fit. Maybe they'll go buy a brand new computer. Maybe they'll invest it. Maybe they'll start a business, whatever. They'll do any number of different things. Maybe they'll just save it and be like, I don't know what I want to do with it. Right. They're not even investing it. They're just storing it in the bank account, under the mattress, whatever. Right. But if you want to be pro-family, don't take it, because think about it this way. When do you get your tax return? You get it annually. So all year long, they're either taking money from you or you end up owing money at the end of the year. And you get to keep your money, but then you owe it. And you have to give them a one lump sum, big sum. So either you effectively, you give them a sum or they give you a sum based on if you did. So let's just say that they give you some money back because you paid too much. Okay, fine. So you were giving all this money throughout the year that they were taking from you that you couldn't use. You had no access to that. You could not use that. So how does that help the person in the now? Right. And so if you take $1,000 from me, that's $1,000 that I could have applied to my kid for whatever I have a need for now. And so the question is, how many people are in a situation where maybe they could use that money, or, maybe they could use it for something more important in the immediate term, or maybe they're already pretty well off and they could use that to invest it and help their child in the future. Either way, I don't see this as really pro-family, because every time you take away money, that's money my family cannot use. And so you, the government, are determining, well, I know better how to use it, but you don't even know my circumstance. You're just assuming that my circumstance falls within some criteria that enables you to take the $1,000 and do something with it. Right. So I think this is inappropriate. I would actually, of course, every time I got to make sure I click this. Let's try it again. There we go. Like, I would totally reject this idea completely. Right. So that's where I am on the Trump accounts. I oppose them. And Trump ran on, reducing virtually everything, reducing regulation, reducing it. But this adds to it, because somebody has to oversee this. There have to be some regulations. Anytime the government is involved, you have to have rules. That means more regulations. You have to have a governing body that's going to, so either you're going to task an existing body or you're going to create a new one to oversee this. So either you hire more bodies in one department or you create a new department, right? That's basically how it's going to work. Because we're not talking about 5 Americans. We're talking about all of us. It's 300 some million Americans. And so however many have children or have this money taken from them, that's how many that have to be overseen by whatever body or entity or group or whatever that's tasked with doing that. So for me, I look at it and I say, yeah, this is not a good bill, or not a bill, but I mean, this is not a good use of the president's office. All right, let me Man, already at an hour. I talk too much, don't I? Let's take a look at some comments here, and then we will go to intermission, and then we'll come back, and then we'll finish up. So let's see what we got here. Do. I'm not going to clip that and send to Mark. I do not want to give him any ideas or knowledge of you joining RLC, even though he probably already knows. He might already know. And we'll see. We'll see whether or not I even get to stay in there. Who knows? Maybe it'll all work out. Maybe not. Let's see. Keith Garrett says, we don't need no stinking definitions. Trump may be using his opponent's definition of insurrection as legit. Remember, our info is spun like cotton candy. It sure is. And it's probably not even a good flavor. Probably bubblegum flavor. Nobody likes bubblegum flavor unless you're like a child. Yeah, that Liberty Lady points out, but DL, MAGA GOP tells me the whole state is burning to the ground. This is the point. This is why we want to evaluate this stuff. And look and be like, it's not really burning to the ground. You have 1 square mile where they're having a problem. Might be a little bit more than that, but it's basically 1 square mile. And so the question is, does the president really need to invoke a power that should be very limited, if even at all? Let's see what else. Plus, this $1,000 account will just be another fund that the GOP dips their hands into. Sounds like a Ponzi scheme like Social Security. I can't talk to Mag about that either. Well, yes, you're correct, but let's not forget that when Republicans implement something, whether it's a legislation or some sort of fund or whatever, and then the Democrats are throwing a fit about it, they only throw a fit about it until they get into office. And then they're quite happy to go along with whatever it is that they were complaining about. And the Republicans do the same thing. My big example that I love using is Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. Remember how Republicans were like, no, that's a terrible idea. It's going to ruin healthcare. And they were throwing a fit. And you were like, okay, what's your bill? And they were like, this is bad. And you're like, okay, but what is your solution? And they didn't really have one. And then when they got into power, they still didn't have one. And then here we are, Affordable Care Act still in place. And nobody's done anything about it, even though that was the worst thing in the world. They do that constantly. So don't worry. The Democrats will be right behind the GOP. They're complaining now. I don't know if they're complaining now, but if they are, they will be right behind the GOP to support it later. And both parties presumably will stick their dirty little paws into it. I have no doubt that at some point they will be like, you know what? There's a lot of money over here. We could probably use it and just put an IOU in there. And we'll totally give them their money back. So let's see. Keith says the government uses money the right way. Question mark? Right? Like we had this whole U.S. aid thing. Government wasting money, diverting funds, in some cases, probably doing it clandestinely, putting it under the guise of this one thing like it's some admirable purpose and then using it for something nefarious. But then Trump's like, all right, after all that, you can totally trust that this time is not going to be bad. Dude, come on. Killing me, government. Okay. Yes, that Liberty Lady, technically both sides will dip their hands into the fun. That is absolutely true. So, all right. I'm going to go to break here and then we'll be right back and we'll finish up. So here we go. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, so let's talk about this airspace executive orders. Now, from the POTUS Tracker website, I was able to look at a couple of executive orders, and I thought these were interesting. We're not going to go into too much detail because it's kind of dry on the details. Like they're just kind of like, all right, you've got to do this, you got to do that, but it's not really clear exactly how it will impact, citizens just yet. But we're going to take a look at them just so that you're aware of what the president is up to and what kind of things he has been signing or executing or whatever. So let's bring this back up here. Do. And so this one is called Restoring American Airspace Sovereignty. So this is interesting. So here's the purpose of it. Unmanned aircraft systems, otherwise known as drones, offer the potential to enhance public safety as well as cement America's leadership in global innovation. But criminals, terrorists, and hostile foreign actors have intensified their weaponization of these technologies, creating new and serious threats to our homeland. Okay. Right off the bat, I'm kind of raising an eyebrow. Why? Because what did I tell you a long time ago? I said the federal government, they love two things that they use all the time, very blanketly. I think blanketly is a word. Um, but they love the Commerce Clause, right? So interstate commerce. They're like, oh, that's interstate commerce. That's under our control. We got to deal with that. And then they also love invoking national security. That's basically what's happening. He's like basically invoking national security already, right? We haven't even learned anything else. He's like, look, these people are intensifying their weaponization. Okay, well, do we have any stories exactly of this? I mean, maybe there are, but I think it's interesting that we're leading, like everything with the federal government always is about, national security or interstate commerce. Anyway, going on. Drug cartels use UASs, that would be your unmanned aircraft systems, to smuggle fentanyl across our borders, deliver contraband into prisons, surveil law enforcement, and otherwise endanger the public. Mass gatherings are vulnerable to disruptions and threats by unauthorized UAS flights. Critical infrastructure, including military bases, is subject to frequent and often unidentified UAS incursions. Immediate action is needed to ensure American sovereignty over its skies and that its airspace remains safe and secure. Do you know what all that really read like? That reads like what we do to other countries. That's what it reads like to me. Like I'm just saying. Like when you go back and you look at it and then you think about some, drone bombings in other countries and like we've bombed weddings and all these other things. This sounds like what we do. Weird, huh? Anyway, let's get past some of the more drier parts. It is the policy of the United States to ensure control over our national airspace and to protect the public critical infrastructure, mass gathering events, and military and sensitive government installations and operations from threats posed by careless or unlawful use of UAS. Okay, so careless or unlawful. So now we're talking like, hey, there's going to be some rules that people are going to have to abide. Like you thought drones were cool. And right now there are some rules. Like I think it's like 400 feet is the max that you're allowed to go above. But then, so it goes down here and it says, they're going to establish the federal task force to restore American airspace sovereignty. So we have a task force that's going to be implemented. Like, I thought we were cutting government. I thought we were reducing government, Republicans. Oh, that's what we were doing. And you haven't really reduced it yet. Like, it's still there. It's fully funded. Like, there's no difference in the funding. There's no difference in the money that you're taking from us, right? And you haven't really, like, yeah, you might have kind of shut down USAID, and that's kind of, I think that's going through the legal process, whether or not they can or cannot do that. But you haven't really, like, the Department of Education hasn't really been shut down. Not quite. I mean, I think if you go to the website, it's defunct. I think still it was, right? But you're creating another entity now. So this doesn't really seem to me to be small government. Like I might be more willing to entertain this if you were like, here are these 5 entities that we have completely shuttered. They will no longer be funded because they don't even exist. We didn't move their responsibilities to another entity. We totally shut it down. Don't need it. We fired all those people. That's money that the American taxpayers will not have to pay in any way, shape, or form. If you did that and then said, but we need to do something here, in this particular case, I might be willing to entertain the idea. The task force shall review relevant operational, technical, and regulatory frameworks and develop and propose solutions to UAS threats as appropriate and consistent with applicable law, and shall make recommendations on the implementation of all actions identified in this order. Okay, so it's kind of telling you what they're supposed to do. They're basically overseeing the regulatory frameworks. They're going to be the ones that are responsible for presenting ideas, working to get regulations, so on and so forth. Okay. Let's see. Going down the line here, I think there's a couple more. The Attorney General, in coordination with the administrator of the FAA, shall take appropriate steps to ensure full enforcement of applicable civil and criminal laws when drone operators endanger the public, violate established airspace restrictions, or operate a drone in furtherance of an element of another crime. On a recurring basis, the Attorney General shall submit to the President through the APNSA legislative proposals see what I mean, that would revise criminal penalties for violations of restricted airspace. So the government now is saying, like, look, we're going to start restricting airspace more than we already are. They're going to restrict it more, and they're going to put a whole lot of rules in there. And then we've created this entity, and their job is to look and just go find rules that we can have. And presumably people will say, well, maybe they're going to be good rules. Maybe like 1 out of every 3 or something like that at best. Like there's going to be a lot of rules that they're going to be more for the government than they are for you. And then here, to the extent permitted by law and consistent with the Fourth Amendment, that's interesting. Executive departments and agencies shall use all available existing authorities to employ equipment to detect, track, and identify drones and drone signals. Well, that's interesting. So now and I appreciate the idea of saying we're going to put some regulations in place, but they have to be consistent with the Fourth Amendment. Now, what the president and this administration, or any president for that matter, what the administration views as being consistent with the Fourth Amendment, and what I consider to be consistent with the Fourth Amendment, probably not going to be the same. And it might not be for a lot of Americans. That's why I'm talking about this, so that you will know, hey, the president has basically said, we are now going to be monitoring airspace. We're going to be creating regulations. So now you, the public, you need to be aware and you need to be paying attention and saying, all right, what are you going to do? Does that make sense? Is that appropriate? You need to ask a lot of questions. Go down here. So what they're saying, within 60 days, again, I'll just read the whole thing. Within 60 days of the date of this order, the administrator of the FAA shall provide, to the extent permitted by law, including the Privacy Act, that's interesting, automated real-time access to personal identifying information associated with UAS remote identification signals to appropriate executive departments and agencies. The government wants to monitor information signals that are sent from drones and basically store the information, which might have personal identifying information. How will that happen? I don't know. I don't know a lot about drones, but I think that's very interesting. Think about it this way. I don't know if you know this, but when you buy a printer and let's say you print a little picture, there's what's called machine identification codes or tracking dots. That's they're not visible to the naked eye, but there's technology that can basically take a picture or something that you've printed. Like let's say you print a flyer, somebody could take that and they could look closely at it, like maybe under a microscope, or they can use some other tools, and they can say, all right, this has identification information that tells us it came from this printer. So then what they can do is they can go and identify who paid for that printer, and therefore they can track it back to you. That's effectively what's being talked about here. There's going to be some information, some way to track a drone back to you in some way. How? It's not known yet. But I just want to point out, like, we already do that with printers. So by the way, if you're printing stuff and you're doing illegal stuff, just know people can track it back to you. I'll point this out. Remember John McAfee? McAfee antivirus? So he was known because he created the antivirus and because a lot of people wanted to test them. And, he was basically bubbled up on the list of targets for hackers. Maybe more out of fun. Like, let's see if we can get the guy that's all about security, right? He was known to have other people buy computer equipment for him. This is part of the reason, right? So that it's not tied to you, so that you can have your privacy. We are in a world where you don't really have that much privacy. You got social media, your printers know can help narrow down and find you. If you have a drone, they're going to be able to do something similar. It may not be directly tied to you. It might not be like they get a signal and they're like, "Oh, this is DL's drone," but they might say, "Okay, here's the details about this drone. Here's some information. Now we can go to the manufacturer and say, where did you send this particular drone?" And they can say, "Well, this one was sent to Best Buy over in Jacksonville." And then go to Best Buy and they can say, "All right, who purchased these drones, this model of drone?" And they can say, "Well, in the past, 1 year, here are all the credit card statements, or here's all the, somewhat identifying information." And so then, bam, now they can find you. You see how that works? So I'm just pointing this out because I think this is interesting. Now, there's nothing here that's necessarily alarming yet. And I mean directly alarming. It's more like indirectly alarming because you're like, hey, wait a minute. The government wants more information. They always want information, but it's not clear exactly what and how they'll do it. So let's look at the other executive order. This is unleashing American drone dominance. Unmanned aircrafts systems, otherwise known as drones, enhance the United States productivity, create high-skilled jobs, and are reshaping the future of aviation. Drones are already transforming industries from logistics and infrastructure, inspection to precision, agriculture, emergency response, and public safety. Emerging technologies such as electrical, vertical takeoff, and landing aircraft promise to modernize methods for cargo delivery, passenger support, and other advanced air mobility capabilities. The United States must accelerate the safe commercialization of drone technologies and fully integrate UAS into the national airspace system. The time has come to accelerate testing and to enable routine drone operations, scale up domestic production, and expand the export of trusted American manufactured drone technologies to global markets. Building a strong and secure domestic drone sector is vital to reducing reliance on foreign sources, strengthening critical supply chains, and ensuring that the benefits of this technology are delivered to the American people. All right. I'm not going to read all through that. I'm just going to tell you this. I think it's a good idea for the government to clear obstacles that would allow the proliferation of drones to be used for supply chain, transport of people, so on and so forth. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, because somebody has to manage and direct traffic in the same way that you have, traffic rules that we all abide by. If I'm driving down the road and I come to a stoplight and I want to turn right, I can turn right on red unless there's a sign that's posted otherwise, right? These are rules that are put into place. And that works here in Jacksonville, that works in California, that works in New York, right? The same rules apply everywhere. It's very consistent. So I think having a set of rules that everybody's following by, not a bad idea. I don't want to buy something kind of expensive and have Amazon send their drone out to deliver it and crash into another drone and destroy my whatever it is that I purchased. I don't want that to happen. That's dangerous for people that might be walking by. That's also a problem for, because now we're costing extra money. There's delays. Maybe I need that thing right away, whatever. Right. So there are good reasons to say, create some rules of the road that that way when Amazon comes up with cool ideas, they can implement them and they can implement them safely. And the pizza delivery that comes isn't going to clash with, my boxers that are coming through Amazon or whatever it is that you're purchasing. Right. Or if we get to the point where we have Uber, we have basically drone Ubers, traveling and picking up somebody and taking them somewhere. If you're comfortable being that person, we won't want that crashing into, delivery. So I think it's okay. However, we need to be diligent about this because here, where was it here? So the United States must accelerate the safe commercialization and fully integrate into the national airspace system, based on what we just read, there are going to be a lot of regulations. In some ways, those regulations will be good. In other ways, arguable, right? And then there will be some ways where you're like, nah, that's a crappy idea. And I think the crappy ideas are going to benefit government. I think that's what you're going to start seeing. And they're going to start saying, like, hey, maybe you can't have a drone that goes more than this. And so they might put a regulation that says you can't have it, it can't be sold, right? Very similar to firearms, right? Where they say, like, you can't have a fully automatic firearm. Well, they might do the same thing for drones. So this one, I think it's overall a good thing to get involved, but a lot of it's going to depend on where it goes. I already see some potential problems, but I think it's something that we should be aware of. So that's what's going on. I don't have, it's just, and this is my take as a libertarian who's not an anarchist and says, yep, there has to be some rules, that we all agree to and work with. So I'm okay with that. But I tend to think that the number of rules that we have versus the number of rules that we actually need there's a great disparity. As I like to say, I want government to go from being the size of a beach ball to the size of a golf ball. So there's a lot of regulation that we should remove, and there might be a little bit here and there that we need to add in order, because drones are new. So we can say, all right, well, airspace is different. You've got X, Y, and Z axis that have to be considered, whereas driving only has basically X and Y, right? That's that. You don't have that third, up and down necessarily. I mean, you kind of do if you talk about trucks and going under bridges, but for the most part, you don't really. So I think all those need to be managed so that we all can have a good society. And I am not necessarily opposed to government. That's why I'm a libertarian, not an anarchist. But we have to be diligent. We have to maintain, in as much as government says we got to maintain order, we, the people, have to maintain order over our government. And they do a lot of things that they don't need to do. I mean, I just spoke about legislation that was unnecessary here in Jacksonville regarding immigration, right? And I was like, I don't think you need that. You already have plenty that's already in place to manage immigration, and our police force already works with ICE. So I didn't really see the need for new legislation. And so we have to be vigilant and say, no need for this, maybe a need for this. And we need to limit our government when they're imposing new legislation, new regulations, new restrictions. So that's my show. Let's look at some comments here, see what you guys are saying, guys and gals. All right. Let's see here. Yes, that Liberty Lady asked, has everyone spanked the like button this morning? Make sure you do that. Help out the show. And if you don't know about spanked, that was a running joke from a follower, Joe, from a long time ago. Time Surfing Alien says, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Pretty much. I haven't seen any difference between any administration. My costs continue to rise. Sure, gas goes up and down, but nothing ever returns to normal. Normal just keeps getting redefined. That is true. And that's why I do the show. And that's why we're talking about this stuff, so that we can kind of lay things out and say, all right, here's some good things. They could go bad. They probably will, mostly because Americans are not vigilant. And hopefully this show will help remind people to be vigilant, and then also put things into good perspective so that the government can maybe, don't hold your breath, but maybe start being a little bit more efficient and effective. And we end up seeing it in our wallets. But again, don't hold your breath. All right, folks, I'm going to get out of here. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to have a guest on. Today's Thursday, right? Yes, today is Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday. Another episode of Dad Talk. Mike Termott will be on. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about politics, but we will try to keep it within the context of him as a dad. So look forward to that. Mike Termott, who is kind of leading the charge on this whole RLC thing, right about the same time that he reached out, we started talking about him being on the Dad Talk show. And so we got him scheduled for tomorrow, the 13th. So look forward to that. I will see you tomorrow. But for now, got to go. Thank you for watching. And I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.